as we said from the start, we're not saying that this is the model exclusively, but it is a model, and it has some rigour about it, and it has some real upside. It has many challenges, of course, to distributors and producers alike. One of the things that's a bit of a concern to us is that, having put this in place, we mightn't have the filmmakers to take up the challenge. But I think it's better us putting that out there and seeing what happens than doing nothing. So Katie's going to take around the microphone, so put your hand up if you want to ask a question. Tim?
G'day. My first question is on the, my own question at this stage is on the percentage that was allocated to the Australian distributor. There was a mark of 8%, and I remember the Hollywood Reporter in 2009 said films between 5 and 15% should expect between 2 and 4% of an Australian territory sale. So 8% is double their high-end range.
Different paradigm, different film. But look, it's not for me, Tim.
Look, I think if I could just take that one, Geoff, if I may. I mean, I think the reality of the situation is that those Hollywood Reporter charts historically have been somewhat suspect, considerably malleable, and should be treated as the Ten Commandments or, you know, the Torah or anything like that. They simply are not. Secondly, although these films will be internationally, commercially driven pictures, they will be Australian originated, Australian sourced, with all of the overlay that gives to additional publicity entitlement.
Can't hear you. Can we check the mics?
With all of the Australian television, free-to-air or pay television, Australian content value, and for all of those reasons, I would have thought that the percentage was not unattainable for this sort of a picture. We have to these sorts of pictures. We have to realise we are looking at a new type of Australian production, an Australian production with a budget range and a creative package of content that will be significantly different to what has heretofore been the case. That brings different values, different numerical calculations applicable to it.
If I could just add to that, when I was at the FFC, I saw on films of this sort of size that the Australian distributor was putting up anywhere between $750 and $1 million. So it does happen.
James?
Hi, James Vernon, MFM. I noticed in your modelling there you had 33% in your finance plan and 33% for the offset. To me, when I finance a film, as soon as I see 33%, that means the producer has got in his finance plan 40%, the whole 40%, when in fact most financiers will only finance 90%, that being the bonded amount. So you've got 33. That would indicate to me that you're taking into account 100% of the offset being financed when that's not likely to happen. And in a lot of cases, and I know it's only modelling, but in a lot of cases, particularly at the high-end film that you're talking about, it'll be less than 33 because the studios will enforce various overseas elements that will reduce the 33 to perhaps down to 30, or even in some cases I've seen 29 and 28.
I think that's all fair comment, and all I can say is that the model is a simplification. We haven't gone into that level of complexity. We just went on the simple third model. One can endlessly complicate the model, but I suspect that most of the time when you do that, and we did do quite a bit of sensitivity testing where we changed assumptions and changed variables, it doesn't really change the outcomes very much. So from from the point of view of a modelling exercise, there's the 80-20 rule applies here. You get most of the benefit off the first run and without varying too many assumptions. We could change it, but we could change that.
Well, I think also to answer you, James, is that there's always the opportunity to get a state agency in as well to make up that gap. Again, we could have put all that in, but it gets too complicated in doing that. But if the offset's only worth 30 and you're short 3%, then obviously going to state agency in a variation of ways where you can get a grant out of them, or they may take an equity position, but that will be available to them.
I think a couple of other observations as well there. We are trying to re-attract the Worthingtons and the Helmsworths and these people and the next Helmsworths, etc., so that they do their next or their next +1 jump-up picture back here in Australia. The studio elements, where we've had to, in the past, utilise non-Australian elements, perhaps that day is in the decline, and that we may be able to, by this funding arrangement becoming available, be able to entice a number of commercially valuable Australian talent back into the Australian ecosphere. And the other thing, again, without sort of nitty-grittying over the model, I think there are, as you would know, James, financiers that will win a little bit more than 90% of the offset, regardless if the offset is only bonded to 90%. So again, this is all well taken, and I think, as David says, we didn't want to go into micro detail. We wanted to come up with something that was fundamentally sound in the broad strokes.
Could I just add as an adjunct to this, and it's the work that Ben Grant and Owen, where are you, Ben, up there? Ben and the negotiating team on the new AFA have been mindful of the fact that we're heading for a sort of a $30 million a ceiling for film to make in their negotiations with the union to get some relaxation on Global Rule 1, where the current threshold is 15 million. We've been pushing to 30 million. And my understanding is from meetings yesterday, Ben, you're pretty close, very close to an agreement, which would give you the sort of flexibility to be able to bring back Australian actors, even foreign actors, for budgets under 30 million without having the imposition of SAG, an important industrial element to this package. So well done, Ben and the team. Next question.
Can I just ask about eligibility? Not who is eligible, more of who is not eligible for this loan regarding Australian or foreign.
Well, it's got to fulfil the producer offset, so it's going to have to fill the regulations that go around the producer offset.
So you have to have producer offset to get the PD?
Yes.
So that means SAP as well?
Correct.
So that'll enable treaty co-productors, of course, to potentially access the PDFF and regular non-treaty productions with significant Australian content. But it's definitely not being perceived as simply a cash box for non-Australian films to be able to jump in and swim around.
Stuart?
Stuart Stonecroft, Level 10. Gentlemen, thanks. Thanks very much for all the work, by the way. Huge effort. Great. Two quick questions. You answered in part, Tony. If we have a treaty co-production, could you talk a little more about how the PDFF would work with a treaty co-production? Sorry, is that better? Yeah, microphone technique, not so good. If we have a treaty co-production, then it clearly meets the offset requirements. Could you talk a little bit more about how you think the PDFF might work with that? And the other question is, if there were a shortfall in the advances, we looked at 25%, how do you think it might fit if there were a private investor who would come in to make up that difference in the advance money rather than the equity money?
Well, I just jump in. Look, for this to work, it's got to be marketplace. Otherwise, we end up where we ended up before, where you have equity, private equity coming in and making a decision to invest in the film when they're not really that equipped to do it. I mean, that's what happened with the FFC in the end, is that people got private equity in to put up distribution advances, which was all bullshit. We knew it was bullshit, and it's fine. You know, we went ahead with it and we got films made. But you have to have, what we want to have is people making a decision whose job is on the line. So it's not an investor putting something in because he happens to have a lot of money and likes to be in the film. This has to be a bona fide distributor or sales agent putting up the hard cash. Otherwise, it starts to move into that grey area, which is the area that the FFC worked in and what Screen Australia works in. And the idea, if this is going to be automatic, so you don't have any other analysis other than, is there hard dollars in this? It has to be true marketplace.
Thanks, Jim? Sorry, then Trish.
Thank you.
Jim McElroy. There were 4 films that you modelled this on, 2 of which I produced, so thank you for handing on all this. Where the 70s were different than now is that there were passionate Australian distributors. There was a supportive and proactive government agency. And there were principles. And whilst I really commend you, the 3 of you, for the terrific work you've done, I support this proposition completely. My main concern is the death of PDFF. And I don't see a revival in the short term. And I just put for your consideration that a possible angle is if there is a solid, firm P&A commitment from the distributor, that would have an equal ranking with any advance.
Can I just make a brief comment just in relation to the history? Look, there's no question that back in the day, David Williams was a passionate, David Williams, the then head of Great Union, was a passionate supporter of the Australian production industry. And there's no question that Graham Burke and Alan Finney were equally passionate supporters of the Australian film industry. They were, of course, also a very hungry young company that were trying to make their way in the world at that particular point in time. I think that what the PDF will do will in fact be to fire up the passion and the enthusiasm of Australian distributors here in this country to re-engage with the industry. You can't blame a distributor for having, somewhat of a non-smiley face about our collective output when you have films performing as, disappointingly as a good number of our films have performed over the last while. Success breeds success. Distributors, David Williams, ultimately was not a philanthropist. I mean, he was very much a patriotic capitalist, but he was still a capitalist, and the same certainly went for Graham and Alan then. So I think it's incumbent on us to fund as part of the reclosing, rebranding, redressing of the industry to re-engage with those guys, so that they can be the proud, head of Paramount in Australia, where a picture comes out here and outgrosses the competitive US title that week, as is happening in Spain or in France or in Russia or in other territories where the majors are engaging with the local industry. So I think to get them to get passionate, to get them to love us, that works both ways. I think this is a step in that direction. The P&A component is something to think about, and like various pieces of detail that will be hoovering out of this meeting and tomorrow's meeting in Melbourne, we'll definitely take that on board.
Look, with the P&A, Jim, there's no doubt that if you have P&A money, it helps drive your whole distribution. Screen Australia does have a P&A fund, that Jonathan Chiswick administers, so they do have P&A money, and I know they've put it against certain films.
Only those films that they have creatively determined.
Well, look, that might be the case, and Screen Australia is going to obviously look at to see, is it going to be they have to look at 2 things. One is what help does the film need because of the commercial risk to it, and the smaller distributors can't afford that. We know that Univista or Roadshow or Paramount will spend big if they feel they can at least get their P&A back. So Screen Australia is there to help supplement certain films to get out to the audience. My personal belief is that I think Screen Australia should actually have a $5 or $6 million P&A fund and really support it. If you're going to make the films, what's the point of making it? It's not going to get marketed. And I remember back in the FFC days, towards the end, we had a big debate at the board about this, which is, what's the point of investing in a film if you're not going to promote it so people will go and see it, because it's just a waste of fucking time to do that. So I actually think that if this fund did get up, then maybe Screen Australia could because this is taking on some of the films that might have come in for money for them, is that they allocate a bit more money towards P&A to do exactly that, which is to support Australian films in this market. Then the question comes, what happens with overseas? But if you're just looking for this market for them to put P&A up, then I think that's a good thing. In trying to make it rank pari passu with the loan, is hard because you're going to have a shortfall in financing. Because if the P&A, if say that they put up $500,000 P&A, or let's even call it $1 million against Australia, but that comes off first, they get that, then, or even if it's shared with the loan fund, you've got a hole in the 30% coming from distribution.
I mean, except for international.
Oh, no, sure, you can have international doing it. So you're saying in Australia have
on the notion that distributors, businesses are distribution.
Yes.
And so P&A is a standalone upfront issue, whereas...
Can't hear, Jim, sorry. Give it a...
the argument I'm putting is that distributors, their core business is distribution. P&A is the core element of that, whereas advances are necessary expenses if they have to get a film.
Well, look, the thing here is, and again I saw time and time again at the FFC, is that a film would come in, would be guaranteed a $750,000 or $900,000 P&A, and then the distributor sold the film and reevaluated what they were going to spend. So, you know, it defeats the purpose.
Oh, you'd have a punishment.
But a punishment clause, yeah, strip them naked. But so it's hard, whereas if it's an advance, it's hard cash that's in there. So, and as I say, you know, P&A, if you can get hold of P&A money, it will absolutely drive distribution deals worldwide, as you well know, because you and I explored that once in the late 80s, and it got a lot of interest. So but this is not a P&A fund. I mean, that might be another way to go, is to look at it at P&A that you go into America and you say to Miramax or whomever, and it's not Miramax now, but the Weinsteins, whatever, we'll give you $5 million P&A to release the film. I actually think, again, when you look at some of the Australian films that could possibly work in America, that Screen Australia should do that kind of deal by putting up $2 or $3 million as a P&A to North America to drive the North American deal. Because once you get the North American deal, it drives all your foreign sales. And I think that's absolutely something that Screen Australia should be looking at.
Trish?
Which is what I understand Omnilab did with the bank job, was it?
Yes,
Correct.
I mean,
Yes.
they've done that. They had a
Yeah.
movie playing this week in the States.
And look how
where
successful that became. Yes. My question is, I'm not quite sure where Screen Australia's evaluation door, because essentially this seems to me to replace what I've been looking for some time, a market door that disappeared under the new guidelines. Does this mean that any film that's going into evaluation, if your distributor wants to use this model to extend the money that can be put into the budget, is it, you mentioned that a local agency, a state agency could be part of the mix. Does this mean Screen Australia can still be part of the mix?
No, they can't. They can't be any Screen Australia money in this, because then it's just double dipping and the government's not going to like that.
Yeah.
So I think it has to be separate. We said the state agencies, because they have attraction money that's coming to their state, and you could use that if you have a shortfall, as James said, because your PO is not 33%, it's only 31%. You have 2% shortfall. There's various ways you can deal with that.
Essentially, you're saying that the distributor will have a better deal under this arrangement than they would in an evaluated film.
Well, I'm not saying
budget.
the distributor has a better deal.
Well, in as much as the distribution money will go further, because it opens up matched funding where that wouldn't occur in an evaluation model.
Well, I don't, look, Screen Australia could receive the $60 million and use it as they use it now. And there will be more films made, and we'll have distributors that come in and put a small amount of money in. We feel that this will hopefully maximize more, but it will make bigger budget movies. And what it does, I think the main thing it does for a producer, and somebody asked me during coffee time, is that what will happen here for the producer is that once the 66% has come back in, depending on what the structure is, you own the movie 100%. Now, if you do the deal where Lionsgate comes in and they basically come in against the world, and they're putting up a third of the money, you use the offset and you're using the loan fund. But they own half the movie. I mean, that's what's going to happen on a deal like that. They'll come in and own half the movie. And therefore, when you hit break even, which is at 66%, give or take, you will then be sharing 50 cents on the dollar with the studio, or depending what you might negotiate. But generally speaking, on a deal like this, they're going to look for that. If you go to the second model that I put up, which is doing a distributor takes certain territories and that delivers a third, you, the producer, owns the rest of the world. So now the loan goes against that. The loan fund has to decide whether the rest of the world is worth that $3.5 million, that other third or not, and the evaluation on that is a pure distribution evaluation. It's not a necessarily creative decision.
So that's a sales projection. That's a figure,
that's right.
And the fund will be making those decisions like a
and that's what a bank does. Banks say they read scripts, but you know, who cares? You know, because that's not their job. Their job is to say, I'm lending against certain territories, what are those territories worth? And they will use the deals that you've done with, say, Paramount to give them an idea of what the value might be in other territories, given this kind of film and what it's worth in Germany and France. And that normally dictates what it's going to be worth elsewhere. There's always exceptions to that rule, because there might be a certain film that works very well for that. But the idea here is that now you say now, have the rest of the world to sell. I'm a great believer in selling the sizzle, that you will pre-sell as you go along, as you package up with this, and you'll pre-sell before the film's finished, to get the loan out, hopefully, that third. Anything that's left over is your money as a producer. Now, the other argument as a producer, you can say, well, you know, that's great, but if I just did a deal with Screen Australia, whereby they were an equity investor, I recruit pari passu with the PO. I'm not sitting behind the investor and the loan fund, so I'm actually better off on that sort of a deal, and that is true. But the majority of those sort of films don't see much money back. You know, I'm not saying that you don't see 100 or 200 or 300 or even 500,000 back, but you'll see far more back on this model, assuming that you make a film that sells.